This week is all about celebrating women. So we've gathered an amazing group of women to cover the 3 core themes around cult power, focused on inspiring inclusion, which is this year's International Women's Day theme. In the first segment, we'll be speaking to investing in the women of today. In the second, what the business of influence means for women. And in the third, empowering female founders. So let's jump right into our first segment, investing in the women of today. We have amazing speakers, Amira Singh from Morgan Stanley's Inclusive Ventures Lab, Saloni Bhojwani, co-founder and partner at Pink Salt Ventures, and Monique Hodgson, founder and CEO of Mumble. And before we jump into our Q&A, I would love for the 3 of you to tell us a little bit about yourselves, about your professional journey, and in particular, what drove you to supporting and focusing on lifting up women specifically?
I've got the mic, so I guess I'll go first. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here to talk about a topic that I'm very passionate about. My name, as you heard, is Amira Singh. I'm a vice president at the Morgan Stanley Inclusive Ventures Lab, which is an in-house startup accelerator at Morgan Stanley. And so at the Morgan Stanley Inclusive Ventures Lab, we are promoting financial inclusion by funding and supporting early-stage businesses that have been founded by founders from traditionally overlooked backgrounds. But I started my career in a very run-of-the-mill job. So I was a mergers and acquisitions banker at Morgan Stanley, which was a great job, really interesting, providing strategic and financial advisory to a lot of large cap clients. But I grew up in India, and I've been very passionate my whole life about increasing access to resources for communities that are underserved, whether that's education, financial, social resources. And 2.5 years ago, I met my business partners and got the opportunity to start within Morgan Stanley a business that has this mission at the heart of it. So I definitely, first choice in my life that I didn't overthink, I just jumped straight in. And now we've built an amazing team, invested in 14 companies, of which Cultmia is one. And I think the decision to follow my passion and bring that into my career was probably the best decision I've made so far. So.
Hi, everyone. I'm Saloni. And I guess I'll start with my background. So I started my career in strategy consulting. I then moved over to tech. I was an operator. I was a city launcher at Uber. I launched 13 cities across the UK. I then joined a pre-seed startup on the founding team and scaled that to Series A, built out the product sales and ops teams, and raised 2 rounds of funding. But I started investing in female founders during that time as an angel investor. So it was actually really born out of my my own sort of consumer needs, and I realized that there was a lot of overlooked areas for women. So it was really out of a commercial and entrepreneurial insight rather than due to the funding statistics, which we can all agree are abominable. But that wasn't actually the motivation for me. It was much more because, women's health is a black box. It still remains one of the biggest under-researched areas in the world, and also one of the biggest commercial opportunities. And we can talk about that more later on. But essentially, then I moved over to the investor side, and then I decided to partner up with my now co-founder to found the institutional phase of Pink Salt Ventures, which is the UK's first VC for female founders. So we invest across health, wealth, work, and play, and we're really about powering the female-led innovation economy at large.
Well, that's fantastic. I love it. My name is Monique Hodgson, and I'm the founder of a company called Mumble Forum. My background is not in finance, but I am a brand strategist, and I work from strategizing with people, governments, and brands. And I came to find Mumble Forum because I discovered there was a huge gap in the market. And when it came to female empowerment, I felt one of the biggest things that was affecting women moving forward was parenting. The lack of support in investing in women that are mothers, and female-led businesses that are struggling. And I felt a huge need that one of the things to answer to that problem was to create a what do you call it, a network or a tribe. It says take a tribe to raise the children. It also takes a tribe to build a company as a founder. So I felt providing this important network was necessary. So we're effectively a members platform that support female-led businesses, but also act as an incubator, putting those women confidence back up, but also putting them in front of investment so they can take their business to the next level.
Thank you so much for those introductions, really inspiring and different journeys that I think will bring an interesting perspective to the first topic that I'd like to discuss together, which Saloni already alluded to, so did you, Monique. Actually, Amira does as well, which is underrepresentation, and Saloni already mentioned that the stats are beyond bleak. I think it's still less than 2% across both the US and the UK of funding goes to female-founded businesses. I read in a Sifted report today that there's still more men sitting in the top tier of management in VCs just with the name David than all the women combined. And that stat hasn't changed since it was uncovered in 2019. So we can all agree that there's a lot of work to be done on both sides of the table. And I wanted to ask the three of you, in your roles, what do we think we can start to move the needle on in order to reduce the gender gap and to focus on underrepresentation?
Well, in our case, I think that there is two important things. It's all about storytelling as well. You can be what you see, what becomes your norm, what becomes your possibility. So at Mumble Forum, originally we started highlighting successful women that were successfully balancing a business and a family and talking about the challenges and how they got there. And I think the important thing is also bringing forward statistics that matter to the corporate and highlighting why they should be investing in retaining these women that they're losing because of parenting. They're losing talent, therefore they're losing money. So whether they care about from the women, gender pay gap perspective, they have to care about it because more women in the economy means better for all of us. And I think it's not just about putting a spotlight, but also providing opportunities and giving women the confidence as well, giving them the latest stats and providing a community where supporting each other, I believe in sisterhood, promoting each other. You need a community that is going to speak about you when you're not in the room. And that matters when you are, let's say, in maternity leave. At the end of the day, will they give you that raise? Will they put you next to it? And it's all about tackling biases against women. Why are they not more investing in women? There is an understanding that after a certain point, that they feel your focus might change, but actually, if you want things done, you have to give it to the busiest person in the room. It really is that simple. And women, they don't just want positions, they want funding, and they are ready, right? And I'm sure you have a lot to say about the stats when it comes to women and their motivation. It's almost like we have to work harder, prove ourselves harder, but therefore they make for a great investment. So I'm sure you can expand on that.
Sure. I just wanted to say this is a huge question, so I will do my best to not ramble on. But there's multiple things that one can do to address this issue of underrepresentation, all the way from education, STEM education when we're talking about technology and venture capital. But realistically, we have to also appreciate that if investors invested with their brains, the world would look very different, right? The reality is that investors invest with their stomach and their hearts. And actually, according to lots of research, men are much more emotional when it comes to investing than women. Also when it comes to business building, which is interesting. So I think from my perspective, what I can do, what I personally can do with what I'm doing at Pink Salt Ventures is obviously fund female founders. That's the obvious one. But I think also educating women that have wealth on the opportunity to actually allocate to female founders, to female fund managers, to other female allocators is really important, because our overarching mission at Pink Salt is actually to back the next generation of female allocators, right? When women exit their business, they have exit capital. Women are 2 times as likely to invest in other women. So if you create that virtuous cycle from the get-go, you then have much more capital being plowed back into female founders, into female-led businesses. And hopefully all of these bleak statistics will slowly diminish away. That said, I do also think it's also a proportionality problem. So, you mentioned it's less than 2%. I think in the US, according to today's report from PitchBook that just came out, it's actually increased a little bit. It's a little bit less terrible. Not that it's great. But in the US, it's actually around 38% of high-growth tech companies are female-led, whereas in the UK, it's just pushing 30. So we need to get that stat up. We also need to see more women exiting their businesses. And as we all know, as women, the only thing that resonates in a room full of men is numbers and performance. So when it comes to what I need to do, it's invest in the best founders and make shit-hot returns on my fund. Excuse my French. So yeah.
I mean, you guys said a lot of great stuff, so I'll keep this brief. But I think from our side, our focus has really been through the investor lens. And we, with our research and a lot of our thought leadership, aim to make the case and kind of galvanize a movement within the investor landscape to kind of meet the founders where they are and be making the change from that side. And our whole business was started because we did actually what we thought initially would be like a very quick, small piece of research on the funding gap in the US. And then we got so many great insights. We actually put out a 20-page report from our CEO and chairman, James Gorman, with some interesting findings. And that actually estimated that the funding gap for funding diverse founders just in the US resulted in more than $4 trillion lost to the economy. So the report was titled The $1 Trillion Blind Spot, which I think was actually hilarious and also very apt. But I think like one thing that was very interesting that I'll just call out is that when funders actually reviewed businesses that are founded by multicultural or women entrepreneurs, they progressed them at the same rates as they progressed businesses that have been founded by just like your run-of-the-mill typical founders or just the baseline. And so that really highlighted the network problem that you're reviewing companies in an echo chamber and you're not necessarily making an effort to open up your networks. And so that was one of our first recommendations, was to rethink the biases built into your process for sourcing and try and think outside the box to access founders you normally wouldn't, because the question of fit with the fund is usually a catch-all that can sometimes, lead to reinforcing the same cycles in the same echo chamber. But it's like a 20-page report, so I'll just say one thing.
So we've spoken a lot about, the gap and the need to fund, and we have a lot of female founders here this evening. What would be your recommendations in terms of going about the process? And do you think that process should be different for women? Do you think their approach and their strategy should vary?
I actually have a very simple answer to this. I think looking for investors is about finding an investor who has the same ethos and thesis that your company fits with. And that's the same for all businesses. That's not to say that it's as easy for every business, but I think doing that work to understand if an investor has demonstrably invested in your space and in founders like you can really help with prioritizing your conversations. And also just personally from my experience working with the founders in our cohort is understanding the power dynamic and reminding yourself that you are the innovator, you are the visionary, and the investor on the other side of the table is someone who can help you realize that vision, but you are the doer who's going to change the world. And sometimes when you're asking people for money, it feels like they hold the keys to your dreams, but actually you hold the keys to them being successful at their job. And sometimes just reminding yourself as a last thing of that before you enter the room helps you establish the right power dynamic in a conversation.
So I'm going to give two pieces of advice. The first is know your customer. So understand your investor. Who are you speaking to? What is their business model? How are they going to make money by investing in you? And I mean, when you're pitching to a venture capital firm, understand what is the venture capital model? What are they actually looking for? What constitutes a VC backable startup? And I would say this, by the way, to any founders, not just female founders. I think this is a massive problem in the industry where there's a lack of education around what actually constitutes a VC backable startup. And the same for angel investors, the same for family offices. Really just understanding your customer, because if you're selling a product to, your target customer, you do a lot of research on what are their needs and wants before you try and sell them anything or even market them. So do the same with your investor base, and really go after it very intentionally. And then the second point I wanted to make, and this is based on it's based on a data set and a pretty famous piece of research done by Professor Donna Cons, who's at London Business School. She's also a global thought leader on why women don't get funded. And actually her research uncovers that women get asked a lot more prevention questions. So that means things that are related to the downside or the risk of your business versus promotion questions, which are actually highlighting the upside or the growth opportunity in your business, which typically get asked to men. So understanding when you're getting backed into a corner in a conversation is really going to unlock a lot for you. We do a lot of coaching with our founders. They've been able to flip the conversation and get like 10 term sheets in 4 days, when they were like scraggling about for their pre-seed round, and then it sort of flips a switch. So really understanding these dynamics and being able to spot them, because both women and men are going to do this to you inevitably. So being able to spot when that is happening and then flip the conversation to an opportunity-related question or discussion is going to change the game.
Yeah, I would just extend what you said and what you said. I think there is two things: understanding that there is definitely a bias, and understanding what are the opportunities. Understanding that if you know the why this is happening, you can also turn around and ask yourself, well, I need to update myself on the data, and I need to understand what is it about this that could be an opportunity for them. I don't know if that makes sense, but often people invest not just in the business, they also invest in the entrepreneur. They would invest if they see you confident. I often, when I'm looking at people to hire for projects, I don't look at the CV necessarily. Of course, it has to make sure there is a business there, but I look if the person is confident. And very often, women feel less confident because of this bias. So there's bias both sides. There is a bias there, and that's okay, but you can control it by the way you respond and how confident you are on it. So that's why I think it's so important to, know the numbers right, and that these biases are something that is historic, and really women are doing great businesses. So if we know that, we know the facts, then we're confident in our own skin to own the room, because there's two things: there's a number, and then there's the way you present yourself and the confident level. So.
We've touched on a few different types of behaviors. Saloni kicked us off mentioning, women might be less emotional than we think. For the benefit of our conversation, I would love for you to land on what are those female-specific characteristics that you think have made certain female entrepreneurs or business leaders successful, and why? Who would like to start this one off? Saloni's making eye contact with me, so.
So I think generally across the board, women are just a little bit more practical. They're also more values driven. So since the 1960s, which is as far back as the data goes, women have been investing and allocating more according to their values than men. So more than ESG and impact as well. But I think that the other thing, and it's a myth that women can multitask, they just have trained themselves to do so. But the reality,
Yes, we can.
No, we can because we've had to, right? Yeah, and you always say, as you were saying, you give the job to the busiest person in the room. Who's the busiest person in the room? It's the mom, obviously. So I think that perspective of we are very good at time management, but we're also very capital efficient. And this is perhaps more pertinent to the conversation, which is that women actually are much more focused on actually driving value from their businesses. And we've seen this across the capital stack. So women typically raise at lower valuations. They also exit quicker, on average a year quicker than their male counterparts, and at parity with the market, so that you're not getting a terrible deal by investing in women. You're actually getting an arbitrage opportunity. It's literally buy low, sell high. And so I think that's a superpower, because in the boom cycle that we saw in the 2020, 2021, where everyone was just pouring cash into companies, a lot of those founders that got funded have absolutely no discipline in terms of how they spend their money either. But then the companies that are now raising, or the companies that now have cash to deploy, are having to now think, okay, how do I get to profitability? What are my business fundamentals, and how do I drive those? How do I create value? And this is a question that female founders have actually always been asking themselves. So we now find ourselves at this inflection point where perhaps in the next few years, it will become very clear that women have been building businesses the proper way from the get-go, whereas men are only now in this down cycle learning, like, oh, actually building a business doesn't mean just throwing money. So I think that's also a really remarkable turning point, and it's very exciting, especially for people that are allocating to women.
Actually, I think you've made some great points. I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, nothing other than I heard recently, that one of our mentors at Mumble Forum, she did a talk called Lead Like a Woman, which I thought that's interesting. What do you mean? She's like, well, I'm starting to coach men, CEOs, on how to lead like a woman. And what she means by that is obviously is all this management approach to leading a team and managing your team, whether it's the carrot or the stick. Women tend to be, I don't know the exact percentage, you're really good at that, but way, way more higher than men in the nurturing department, in the incentivization, and therefore you have higher percentage of, performance there. And there's so many natural traits by this woman situation, but also historically, when women started working in the workforce, you can even see it in fashion, the power suit. We were trying so hard to be men in order to be accepted in the workforce, and now it's shifting to trying to be more, in your femininity, find your power, and I think that's more and more powerful, because from an authentic self, you're profiting from your natural abilities, and those have very strong high leadership trait that is being proven now men are starting to use in order to incentivize, not with the stick, but with a carrot and a hug, maybe. No, I'm kidding.
So we've touched on this perhaps indirectly, but being more to the point about the busiest woman in the room, thinking about some of those moments in a woman's life that really requires additional support. I, for example, received investment offers for our seed round when I was 9 months pregnant and went through the due diligence process with a newborn. There was no playbook out there that taught me how to navigate that situation. It was just day by day figuring it out. But I would have really benefited from a proper support network to help me guide me through that process. And given the three of you have such unique perspectives, curious to hear how would you recommend facing some of those more woman-specific challenges during your business cycle?
So, which your specific question would be, how would you face going through a business whilst also raising a family or challenges like that? I think it's just about, we are used to wearing many hats. I've got a friend of mine that she went on the round of investment whilst pregnant as well. And she did receive a lot of biases like, oh my God, am I going to invest in this time bomb? God's not what's going to happen when she actually delivers. And actually, she's doing incredibly well. Her company is valued at 33 million right now. And what she did is she compartmentalized. She said, I didn't, she became a hybrid. She didn't divide both lives. She mixed them up. I mean, she's lucky enough to be a founder and is able to integrate the two. But I believe companies need to also be facilitating these things for women, because, being a mother is not something you necessarily, yes, you choose, but it's part of womanhood as much as menopause at some point. So why are we pretending that these things doesn't exist? It's because the book was written by men and they don't necessarily have those issues. So now they're starting to address it more. And I think it's so important. They're starting to put also some companies and banks things in placement as easy and as simple as a breastfeeding room in a corporate. I mean, how easy is that to manage? It's just a breastfeeding room. You're giving an employee dignity. And that obviously drives emotional value. They're more loyal to you because you're helping them cope. very stressful situation. And I think it's just about moving forward to more hybrid life. COVID was proof of that. It is possible. And I just think women nowadays want more from work, and they want to be able to be mothers, to be founders, to be working people, and we don't have to choose anymore. So I think it's time that we need to update the system, because generations are moving forward, they are way more unapologetic. They really, really want to have it all, and I don't blame them. Yes, we can.
So that's a great question, actually. I was speaking to one of my founders about this literally the other day, on Monday, and she told me that she was expecting, and she was like, yeah, and I was like, congratulations, like I was super excited. She was like, that's the first time someone said that in response to my news, which is quite telling, right? And anyway, so I think there's like a broader point around, you know, the Nordics have this really down pat, right? They've got parental leave that is mandatory for both the mom and the dad.
Equal, right?
Yeah, it's equal. So it's mandated. So men also have to take the same amount of time off, which means the motherhood penalty is just the parent penalty, and therefore it disappears, because there is actually a thing called the motherhood penalty. Yeah. So what the Nobel Prize was given for last year is unpaid labor and the motherhood penalty, and the economists that actually did a study on that. But essentially, you know, you erase that and you sort of change the fabric of society quite instrumentally. But since none of us, I don't think, are policymakers in the government, I think my answer to your question of like how should women navigate this, I think there is a real power in community, in having friends that have, you know, and other peers in your stage of life that have navigated that. So whether it's, you know, your investors, if they're female, or other founders in their portfolio, or other founders in communities that you're a part of, and actually creating safe spaces for women to talk about these issues and ask the questions, because it is also sensitive, right? Like if you're geriatric pregnancy, you don't want to tell people too early, but then you're also freaking out because you're like, how am I going to do this? And those are very real questions and very real concerns. So I think being able to have safe spaces for founders, for business people, business women, to actually ask those questions and get help from their peers on navigating it, because there's definitely women that have done it, right? There's loads. It's just
outspoken enough.
Yeah, no one talks about it.
You just hear the horror story.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes it actually scarier than just talking to, like, you know, 4 or 5 women about what they did. But the other thing is everybody's different, and everyone's journey is also different. Like, some people literally, like, it wrecks their body for a long time, right? And then they need more time to come back to market. But some people can just snap back in like a few weeks. So I think having that range of perspective as well.
So just conscious of time and to make sure we have time for questions, as we wrap up this segment of our panel, what would be the one thing you'd like the audience to take away going into International Women's Day tomorrow? Maybe we can start with Amira.
Great. So I think I spoke about this a little bit before, but if there's one thing I could leave you with, International Women's Day is really about celebrating womanhood. And we've just spoken a lot about statistics that prove to us what we already know, that women are like superhuman in many ways. Women work hard, provide great results, and have many superpowers that sometimes you don't necessarily see in yourselves. And I think a lot of times when you, especially with all the founders we work with, you feel overwhelmed or you've taken on so much, and you talk a lot about resilience. Like, there's times when it's actually all kind of too much and you feel overwhelmed. I think guilt is just not a productive emotion in those moments to judge yourself. And I think what I've seen work really, really well for founders, but also just, you know, women I've worked with in general and for myself, is to reconnect with the why of why you do what you do. And there's so much kind of energy and rejuvenation that can come from reconnecting with your why. And I just want to say one second thing, which is there's so much power in being a woman. I'm sure you all have heard about stereotype threat. I think when you do have these big meetings or when you have, things that you really want to make happen before going into that room or sending that email, instead of thinking like, oh, I'm a woman, so it's so much harder for me, remind yourself about all the amazing things there are about being a woman. And I think that mindset shift could impact your energy as you walk into those rooms and impact the kind of power you project. And I've seen it happen time and time again with all the founders that I work with.
Yeah, I guess my point was going to be very similar to that of, I think victim mindset really doesn't serve anyone. We're half of the world's population, and we definitely punch above our weight in terms of opportunity versus outcome. I think now it's 15% of unicorns are female-led, and yet 2% of funding goes to female founders. So remember that the next time you go into a pitch.
Well, I think this year, United Nations International Women's Day is all about investing in women, invest in progress. It's not just progress for women, it's progress for society. Like you said, women represent a huge percentage. I think worldwide we're more women than men, actually. So how is it that we're not participating more in these circumstances? But also as parents, because I am wearing that hat as well, to me, I believe in the power of legacy, raising the future strong women and raising boys that support women. And I think we really have more power than we realize. If you shift the narrative of victim and you realize how powerful you are literally raising the next generation, and these people are going to run the world. So why are we not paying more attention to parents? Because when we're old, those kids are going to be running the world. So I do think there's enormous power there and a huge responsibility. And I think it's just about making sure that the message is building legacies, advocating, talk about other founders. I think it's not just about me, but I think I think women tend to see things like the pie, the scarcity mindset, where you think, well, there's not enough seats, so therefore I'm just going to talk about myself. Really, it should be about how can we make more seats, the mindset of the candle. If my light lights your light, and your light, I'm not getting less brighter, but we're lighting up the room for more women. So I think that's what needs to change in terms of women. We need to change that mindset. Men don't do that. They really don't. And I think women have this because there isn't and has never been enough seats at the table. So it's sisterhood. I think it's going to really save us all.
Is there one burning question? And if not, there is one burning question.
It's a selfish question, but I have the best people to answer. I am a founder and I am currently raising, but every VC I talk to says you have to be at the 1 to 2 million revenue mark before VCs get interested. I guess my question is, what is the reason for that? And what advice do you have for people that are kind of like in that phase before? How do you grow, obviously, without the investment?
I think that might be Saloni.
At what stage are you? I think if your revenue is markedly different to what investors are asking for, you're looking at investors who invest at the wrong stage. So, and I think if we can have a more detailed conversation after, yeah. But I think generally if you see a misfit, there's probably a problem in your process of identifying and qualifying the investors that you're speaking to. And even though it can seem like you really need funding and you'll take money from anybody, don't give away your house just because you really need money right now. So make sure that you do have a robust process for qualifying the people that you're talking to, which Saloni covered a lot. That's like a very quick rapid fire answer.
Okay. Can we thank Amira, Saloni, and Monique? Thank you so much.